Don't you just love post-fight interviews? They are one of my favorite things about this sport. I could talk about them all day long, especially interviews that have so much more going on under the surface than it appears at first glance. Interviews that are saying one thing on the surface, but mean so much more in the proper context. And that is what we're going to talk about today, and I'm jacked about it, so let's dive right in. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point, and these are the 10 most loaded post-fight interviews in MMA history. Number 10, Lesnar as Dana. Remember when Daniel Cormier became the double champ by beating Stipe Miocic, and then the entire post-fight interview became about Brock Lesnar? Now, to be fair, that wasn't Brock's fault. Cormier called him into the cage. Obviously, this whole thing was planned. Brock was literally just standing there waiting to step into the cage. Of course, the fight would never take place, as the window for the fight really never worked out. Okay, so what is the loaded part of this, right? Well, the loaded part is right here.
I walked into this building and watched the heavyweight disasters from the beginning. Nagano's a piece of Miocic's a piece of
As I see it, there are two ways of looking at this moment. One, he is reflecting on the two fights that happened that night. Ngannou had the worst performance of his career in one of the worst fights ever against Derek Lewis, and Miocic just lost the title to Daniel Cormier moments before Brock barged into the cage. So, could he just be talking about how much they sucked? Sure, he could, but he called them pieces of shit, which to me indicates something about their characters. And wouldn't you know it, Dana White's had problems with both of those guys. You know, the dude that Brock was hanging out with all night, who probably had conversations with Dana White in the context of the evening about both Ngannou and Miocic? Is it a theory? Yes. Is that why it's number 10? Also yes. But I stand by that subtext because Brock doesn't know either one of these guys, so who is he to call him a piece of shit? Number 9, BJ Penn versus Mike Dolce. Hey, you guys remember that time that BJ Penn came back after 2 years away and they gave him a season of tough and he fought Frankie Edgar for a third time and it was the worst fight ever and BJ looked like the ghost of BJ Penn? I tried to forget it as well. But after the fight, a completely dejected Prodigy seemed super disappointed in the outcome and ready to hang up the gloves for good. Unfortunately, he would have 4 more fights, but that's neither here nor there. What is incredible about this interview is that framed perfectly behind Penn is dude bro scientist and nutritionist to the stars, Mike Dolce. Now, why does Dolce cheesing it in the background have anything to do with this video? Because BJ blamed him for the entire thing. After the fight, BJ took to bjpenn.com, to air his grievances about Dolce's services. Apparently, because the cut was to 145, Penn was really worried about making the weight, so for 3 weeks of time, the Proger J paid Dolce $22,000 to essentially be his personal chef. But after weigh-ins, Penn claims that Dolce did not do enough to get him back to fighting weight and that it affected his performance. Dolce came back with a good old, I don't know what you're talking about, bro. I was hardly a part of your camp. Also, you weren't even training much when I did see you, so it sounds like you had more problems than me bringing you enough sandwiches.
You know, BJ's odd, non-factual comments when they were made. And I just kind of shrugged my shoulders and shook my head, and I kept moving forward and staying positive.
The feud would eventually escalate to where all great feuds do, physical threats of violence, with Penn telling Dolce on Twitter, I'm gonna have a heart-to-heart talk with your glass jaw when I see you. It's fun stuff, guys. Number 8, Dom Cruz versus Hans Mullenamp. You're probably thinking right now, who the fuck is Hans Mullenamp? Well, he would be the Monster Energy marketing executive that Dominick Cruz called out after his win over Casey Kenny because Dom felt like he was being figuratively held hostage by the man.
There's a guy named Hans Mullenamp who's been holding a lot of fighters hostage.
But when you try to force me and you text me if I don't comment on your page that you're gonna take what pays my bills, you can't use me in order to get clout, as they put it.
Okay, so what is going on? Why is Dominick Cruz wasting his microphone time? 1, because he doesn't give a fuck, and 2, allegedly Mullenamp has this bizarre relationship with fighters. If you've seen his social media, a lot of them are involved in his posts, and Cruz is essentially claiming that because of his position at Monster Energy, Mullenamp is using those sponsorships to indirectly force these fighters to interact with him. Now, this is all alleged, and while Dana White was somewhat neutral on the matter at the time, probably because Monster Energy is one of the UFC's biggest sponsors, years, he and the Molster had a pretty interesting confrontation on Instagram years ago, where in a comment, Dana just kind of ripped this motherfucker to shreds, and essentially claimed the same things that Cruz was claiming. So, make of that what you will, but man, I bet for 99% of fans that night, it was just like, what the fuck is Dominick Cruz talking about right now? Number 7, Rumble's coaches disappear. Okay, so Rumble Johnson's final fight in the UFC, he'd lost to Daniel Cormier a second time, and then shockingly in his post-fight interview, announced his retirement from the sport. But in an absolutely heartbreaking moment, it appeared he'd been abandoned by his team.
Where are my coaches? I need my coaches to come in here. Where's Henry?
So there's been a lot of speculation over the years about what exactly happened here, and truth be told, we're never going to get a real answer, but we do know from transcripts of his corner during the fight that they were incredibly frustrated that Johnson had chosen to wrestle as often as he did in the fight. Head coach Henry Hooft in particular was very upset. Now, Hooft has made a claim about why he was missing, and I'll be honest, it's really confusing because he said he had to go change his shirt.
So I walked back to get put another shirt on, and I wanted to wait him at the doctor's place. And when I was in the back, I heard that he was like looking for me and looking for other people, and I was like, oh shit.
What?
What does that mean? It's the end of the night. Why do you have to change your shirt in that exact moment? And the problem with him claiming he didn't know it was going to be his retirement is that Johnson said he told his coaches in his retirement speech. Now, it should be noted that when Rumble made his return to the sport years later for Bellator, it was still under Henry Hooft. Johnson retired because he believed a CBD business at the time was viable, but later revealed he was also worried about CTE. The tragedy of that concern being that he would pass in 2022 due to lymphoma. Number 6, Frank Shamrock's retirement. I'm trying to imagine that you're one of the few thousand people that saw UFC 22 when it happened, and what you might have thought of Frank Shamrock's retirement speech after his 4th consecutive title defense against Tito Ortiz. On the one hand, it sounded like he was hanging it up. On the other, he was making statements that sounded like someone that's very much going to keep fighting.
I think I'm going to leave this belt in the ring here for the next crew to pick up and retire my title tonight. No one's going to beat me ever till I get bored of this game.
Well, you're contradicting yourself.
So, as it turned out, because the UFC was a sinking ship, Frankie Baby wanted off the boat, and the life raft was a contract that said if he beat Tito Ortiz, he could leave the promotion, which is exactly what he did. But even though he cited spending time with the wife, that was in fact not what he planned on doing, as he would be right back in action just a bit over a year later. Shamrock was headed for Japan, where real money could be made, and he damn near had a fight with Sakuraba, which would have been a massive deal, but it never materialized. You know, if you want to learn more about Frank Shamrock, I would highly recommend Balian's excellent documentary about him. Number 5, Tito ducks Chuck. Man, we absolutely should have known this fight was not going to happen when it should have, after Tito hopped into the cage following Chuck Liddell's victory over Vitor Belfort at UFC 37.5, the dumbest name for any event that's ever happened. Truth is, Chuck was already #1 contender, but now he was #1 with a bullet, and it was so obvious that he'd be fighting for the title next. Now, Ortiz did already have a title defense lined up with Ken Shamrock, but whoever came out of that was getting Liddell, and while Ortiz's impromptu interview with Joe Rogan in the cage that night had all the language you would want to hear.
Well, it looks like me and him are next. I got a little thing before him, though, but after that, it'll be me and Chuck.
But the way he said it, some of the things he did say and some of the things he didn't, in hindsight, it really looks like this guy is not interested in fighting Chuck Liddell. And of course, as it would turn out, after the Shamrock victory, Tito flat out said that a new deal needed to be made if he was gonna fight Chuck, and that's when that year-long delay came, with the UFC making an interim title for the first time to put pressure on their champion. But yeah, this one's the definition of loaded, because on the surface it says one thing, but underneath there's a whole bunch more going on. Number 4, Izzy and Drius get awkward.
Do we really have to fucking talk about this?
You want to talk about something needing context? If you were a fan who only watches the fights and does not engage in social media in any way, shape, or form, the confrontation between Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya after DDP beat Robert Whittaker would be one of the most baffling moments you've ever experienced. This was a title eliminator, which meant du Plessis was next in line for Adesanya's gold, but there was way more going on here, and why Izzy went on a tirade that we literally can't even play any part of, honestly. But it was incredibly awkward and racially charged. So what the hell happened here? All right, well, when DDP entered the UFC, his very first post-fight interview made it clear, and I'm using his exact words, because yes, he did say this, that he wanted to be the first real African champion. Now, what exactly does that mean, and why did Adesanya take offense to it? For du Plessis, being a real African champion meant that he lived and trained there, whereas the previous 3 champions of African descent, Ngannou, Usman, and Adesanya, had moved from the continent and were training elsewhere. But of course, the topic of African identity, how it's defined, who gets to claim it, and how race, geography, and heritage shape that definition is a massively loaded topic. Du Plessis sees himself as an African by nation and upbringing. Adesanya sees himself as African by blood and culture. Where things get complicated is the history of colonialism that makes the conversation a lot more complex, and more importantly for our video, incredibly emotionally charged, which is why Adesanya had had the reaction he did to Duplessis, and why, without context, that moment was incredibly confusing. Number 3, Khabibs Putin plea. I mean, what other way could UFC 223 end than with something completely wild, just like the whole damn week was?
O'Connor was absolutely throwing things. Oh yeah.
After Khabib Nurmagomedov unbelievably beat Al Iaquinta to earn the lightweight title, he gave a gracious speech, called out Conor, asked for a fight with GSP. I mean, it was your typical fare. But then, at the end, Khabib spoke in Russian at great length. When Joe asked him to translate, Nurmagomedov weakly tried to explain what was going on, something about his friend, but you could tell it was not a positive topic. And as it turns out, it was certainly not a positive topic. Essentially, what Khabib was doing was pleading directly to Vladimir Putin to help Ziauddin Magomedov, an oligarch and co-founder of Eagles MMA, who had recently been charged with embezzling 11 billion rubles. Completely unrelated to mixed martial arts, by the way. The guy was ultra wealthy, he was in the energy sector, he just happened to be friends with Khabib. Unfortunately, he was not friends with Putin, though, and there's been a lot of alleged speculation that his imprisonment had more to do with his relationship with the previous president of Russia, and old Vladdy not being a big fan of that. Whatever the case, Khabib's pleading did not work, and a couple years ago, Magomedov was sentenced to 19 years in prison. Number 2, George steps away. It was one of those shocking MMA moments you just had to be there for, and one that immediately had everybody wondering what exactly was going on. So, GSP, greatest welterweight of all time, he's fighting Johnny Hendricks. It's a close bout, but Johnny definitely took it, not according to the judges though, and it's chaos after the fight. Even more so, because GSP sort of weirdly half retires.
I need to hang up my glove for a little bit, at least.
Are you retiring right now? Is that what you're saying?
I have to go away for a little bit, at least.
I'll tell you one person who definitely knew how they felt about it, and that was Dana White, who laid into GSP at the press conference, unaware that he would be attending.
He didn't say, I'm going to retire, I'm hanging it up, it's been great, everybody. He said, I'm going to take some time off, and it's enough.
Now, there has been speculation over the years as to what exactly was the reason that St. Pierre took his near-permanent sabbatical, and the answer seems to be twofold, at least as it relates to GSP himself. One, he felt like the sport was not doing anywhere near enough to combat PED use, something he'd been very vocal about recently, especially in the lead-up to the Hendricks fight, and he would much later reveal very candidly that he was going through a depressive bout at the time, and he simply needed to step away and focus on his mental health. Now, there were all sorts of rumors and claims about things that were happening in his life. TMZ was talking about pregnancies and his father dying. None of this turned out to be true, but you will not find many more loaded interviews than that one between what was going on in George's life and Dana White's reactions in real time. Number 1, Nate the Needle Mover.
I'm not surprised, motherfuckers.
Never has a sentence in mixed martial arts meant so much more than what it seemed. I'm not surprised, motherfuckers is not just iconic because it's awesome, which it is, but because of what it truly meant. And it works on so many levels. More towards the surface, he's not surprised that he beat Conor McGregor. In the lead up to the fight, he essentially called Conor a weight bully, an advantage he simply would not have in this fight. And he's not surprised he beat Conor because this motherfucker has been here this whole time working his ass off. He's fought some of the best. If this fight was going to deep waters, Conor was in trouble, and that is exactly what happened. But the biggest meaning here, the real thing he's not surprised about, is that he is a motherfucking superstar. For years, Nate trudged through the shit, getting 20-20.
Listen, if Nate Diaz was the guy, if you move the needle, those are the guys that make the big money.
He simply could not get over because the UFC was just not letting it happen. And when that small window opened, take on our most popular guy, a guy we think can beat you, a guy you're fighting on short notice off the couch, Nate took everything the UFC had held back from him and then some. That line in that interview was not just the culmination of that event, it was the entire culmination of Nate Diaz's career and his belief that if he was given the opportunities, he could be one of the biggest draws in the sport. And what do you know? He was right. Just like the editor of this video, Max Randall, is always right, because the guy is a fucking genius. Follow him on his socials, go check out his awesome YouTube channel, and give him a high five if you're in New Zealand. A massive thanks to our channel members. You guys seriously fucking rock. Fight fans, become a member as well. Hit the join button. You're gonna get exclusive content. I highly recommend it. Like and subscribe so I can give you more context about more post-fight interviews. Leave a comment and let me know how I did, and thank you very kindly for watching. Have a great week.